Okay, so next we're going to talk about a really popular argument for the existence of God. It's going to be worded in a way that you haven't really seen before, most likely, and I'll explain it. It is a little on the complicated side, so we'll have to go slowly through this thing. But you do hear about people talking about how God exists because of how amazing the world is, how complex it is, that it must have a designer because of um, how complicated it is, and the organisms in the world are so um, well made. And so the idea is that there must be um, a maker, there must be a designer of organisms that we see that are so complicated and good at surviving. Um, So, in the video about rules for a good argument, I was telling you that I would be giving you arguments that are valid. I've set up this argument so that it is valid, um, meaning if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. Our focus is going to be on whether or not the premises are reasonable. We have a first premise here in the design argument that, again, it's a little on the complex side. I'll explain it um, in a moment with examples. And by the way, in your as you're taking notes when watching this video, um, write down any examples we use to explain premises or anything any objections we talk about to an argument. Always keep track of which premise is being explained and or objected to. All right, so let's look at the first premise. If a hypothesis, call it H1, is the best explanation of a fact, call it F1, and there's no other alternative hypothesis, H2, that better explains some other fact, F2, then probably the first hypothesis is true. I'll give you an example for that in a moment, but let's just see how this connects with creationism. And if you look below, you'll see creationism is the idea that each organism in the world was separately created by a very, very intelligent designer, namely God. So the idea is that each one of us is separately created by God. Each animal out there is separately created by God. Um, every organism is separately made by God, creationism. So, premise two is saying creationism is the best explanation of the fact that organisms are intricate and well suited to survive and reproduce. And there's no other hypothesis that better explains some other fact. So, the conclusion is that probably creationism is true. So, this is like an argument for the existence of God based on evidence. So there's evidence in front of us, according to this argument, that supports the existence of God. It's also not saying for sure um, God exists. It's just saying probably. So this is different from some other arguments for the existence of God um, in that way. It's a kind of down to earth argument, if you will. All right, so let's look at an example for premise one. So, what if there's a fact that, like, my car is making terrible noises? So, it's just loud, clanky, metallic kind of sounds. Um, so, one hypothesis is that there's something busted. There's something with the car's engine, for instance, that's busted and making the loud, clanky noise. So, that's an explanation of the fact that the car is making those noises. Um, what would be another hypothesis? Well, another hypothesis is that it's possessed. Maybe the car is possessed and the demon inside the car is making all these noises. Um, now, if there was some other fact, like we saw a demon come out of the engine and talk to us, then maybe we would put some more credence behind the hypothesis that the car is possessed. But assuming that there isn't anything, the only fact we have is that the car is making noises. We would say that probably the first hypothesis, that the car is busted, is true. That's a better hypothesis than the hypothesis that the car is possessed. What premise two is saying is that when you look at particular organisms, um, take a human, like, we're really complicated. Our eyes, for instance, are amazing at seeing. Our hands, for instance, are very um, mobile and able to do lots of different things. Um, we're pretty well set up to survive. We have good brains that help us problem solve. Um, it's not that we're perfect, but we are pretty well suited to survive and reproduce, and we have shown a history of that. Um, so, premise two is saying the best explanation of the intricacy of organisms and how well they are at surviving and reproducing is that each organism was separately created by a very intelligent designer, namely God. So then we get the conclusion that probably creationism is true. Now, another hypothesis, back to premise two, another hypothesis besides creationism is that organisms randomly popped into existence. And so creationists, people who believe in this argument, will often say that it's not just random that organisms are intricate and well suited to survive and reproduce. That doesn't make any sense. It's much more likely that there was a creator of the organisms. So that's why they think creationism is a better explanation than the idea that organisms randomly popped into existence. Okay, so this is, again, an argument for the existence of God based on organisms like ourselves or animals, other organisms that are really good at surviving, reproducing, and they're complex. There are objections to this argument, and I'll show you the next slide that's got one. Let's focus on the first one for now. So, this is an objection to premise two. Basically, it's saying there's another explanation that's at least as good at creationism, at explaining why organisms are complex and able to survive. So, this is the theory of evolution. So, we're going to focus first on the atheistic theory of evolution. If you want to learn more about evolution, it's taught in biology classes. Biology teachers just tend to assume that evolution is true and they tell you about how it works. You can Google evolution if you want to learn more about it. I'll give you kind of like a simple explanation um, of evolution. All organisms um, are related to each other. So the idea is that we all have common descendants that go way, way, way back in time. Evolution is a very long process, um, and that the sort of the first organisms came out of inorganic matter. So it's a chemistry point that they're making, that like if you take chemicals that aren't themselves organisms and you put them together in a certain way, you're going to get an organism that comes from that. And scientists, again, most all scientists believe in this, that the sort of the first organism was created out of inorganic matter, and then from those first organisms, there evolved later organisms, more and more complex, and then eventually we have what we have now. Now, how do they evolve? Well, they evolve as they react to their environment. So that's the part where they evolve by the process of natural selection. Simple example I'll give you is like maybe a, a lot. Let's see, zebra. Think of zebras, and I don't know who is the prey for a zebra. Let's just say it's a cheetah. Okay, so a cheetah is chasing the zebra. Um, So when zebras are in a herd, I guess, um, they're together, right? And so then there's a predator chasing them. So the idea is that the slower zebras are going to get eaten by the cheetah, um, or lion or whatever it is. I don't know what the predator for a zebra is, um, but the idea is that the slower zebra will get eaten. And so over time, what happens to this group of zebras is that they're just the faster ones are the ones that are surviving. They're then having baby zebras, if you accept my sort of simple language here. So now they've got baby zebras, and those zebras are also going to be fast because they're born that way because their parents were fast. And then over time, those baby zebras will be chased by the zebra, and then it's only the fastest of the baby zebras that are going to survive, and so on. So the idea is that over time, and it takes a really long time, organisms improve in relate because of their environment. So they're passing on generation to generation improvements. Again, evolution is a very slow process. They're not saying it happens overnight, but eventually, over time, for instance, zebras are going to get faster if their predators are chasing them. So, again, back to the atheistic theory of evolution, the idea is that all organisms, you, I, my dog, um, the people around us, um, everybody at the zoo, they've all evolved by the process of natural selection, and we all have a common ancestor, which is sort of that first organism that came from inorganic matter. Okay, so again, back to the design argument. The second premise is saying creationism is the best explanation of how complicated we are and how well we are suited to survive and reproduce. Defenders of atheistic theory of evolution are going to say, well, wait a minute, there's this other theory that's at least as good, which is the theory of evolution, that um, we all have a common ancestor, and that we survive through natural selection. Um, Now, there's another way to frame the theory of evolution. So there are some people who believe in God and also believe in the theory of evolution. So what they'll say is that the first organism. So remember that those organisms that have come from like inorganic matter, according to the atheistic theory of evolution. What the theistic theory of evolution would say, well, the first organism doesn't actually come from inorganic matter; it comes from God. So God created the first organisms and then let evolution happen. So then evolution is true with respect to all the later organisms. So like you and I and the animals at the zoo, those have all um, been created through the process of evolution. It's just that God created the first organisms. So again, this is an objection to premise two. That two is saying the best explanation is that God created each organism. Defender of the theistic theory of evolution is going to say, well, there's this other explanation that's at least as good, which is that God created the first organism, and then evolution is true with respect to all later organisms. Now, there is a maneuver that a defender of the design argument could do, and they could revise creationism. So they could say, well, let's just say creationism is this, that each organism was separately created by a very intelligent designer, namely God, and that God just made it look as if evolution is true. So the idea is that um, for us humans, it appears that we've evolved through natural selection. God has just set things up to look that way when actually it's not. So I'll let you think about whether or not you think God has done that. Has God created things to look like evolution is true when really it's not? Or is it more likely that evolution is true? And again, there's different types of evolution. There's the atheistic theory or the theistic theory. You can decide which of any of these theories that you agree with. Do you believe in creationism, each organism separately created by a very intelligent designer? You probably don't believe that organisms randomly popped into existence. I don't know of anyone who really does believe that, but there may be some people. Um, a lot of scientists believe in the atheistic theory of evolution, but some of them also believe in the theistic theory of evolution. And then the last one for you to consider is the revised creationism. Each organism created by God, but then God made it look as if evolution is true. You decide which of these theories you believe. Obviously, which one you believe is going to determine whether or not you agree with the design argument. So, just to sum up, in support of premise one, we use the example of the car making noises, and we said the best explanation of that is that the car is busted. Another alternative explanation is that it's possessed, but there's no reason to think that's happening. So probably the car's busted. Premise two is saying creationism is the best explanation of how complex we are, how well we are set up to survive and reproduce. Again, organisms. So probably creationism is true. One of the ways to object to this argument is to criticize premise two and say one of those versions of the theory of evolution is at least as good as creationism. And then a maneuver that the design argument could do is they could change their original statement of creationism to this one, that each organism was created by God, and God just made it look as if evolution is true. All right, I'll end on that note. I want you to decide for yourself if you think this is a good argument. Thank you. Bye-bye.